there's a lot of talk about recall Inslee right now. It's kind of a hot topic because he's not entirely the most popular person for, I would say, a little over half the population, but I don't know. It's debatable. What can you tell everyone with the question or who signs this petition to recall Inslee? What is the realistic action on this?
Well, we hear this quite a bit because of what's going on down in California. So people are like, well, how come they were able to recall Gray Davis, and how come they were able to right now start the recall process and actually get to a vote on the Gavin Newsom down in California? So why can't Washington have a similar process here for Jay Inslee if he's actually overstepping, acting in ways that aren't appropriate? And the short answer is, well, there's no short answer. But the answer is that Washington state's laws are significantly different than California's when it comes to the recall process. And I think one of the two main differences are, in Washington state, there is a court threshold. So before a recall can go forward, it has to go to the Superior Court judge who has to approve the recall. So they have to make a determination in the legal process that Governor Inslee has some way violated his constitutional duties in a fashion that would allow a recall to go forward. So that even predates when you start collecting signatures and all that kind of stuff. And the threshold's high for what it takes to actually for that judge to say that, no, you violated your duties. Both sides get a chance to come into court, present their case, and talk about what's going on. I actually know the process because I went through it about 4 years ago here in Whatcom County on what most people considered a pretty frivolous, claim for a recall. And the recall was based upon the fact that I was working for President Trump, and that's not a reason why you can recall an elected official. The second threshold, though, is if a judge does say that you can go forward with a recall, then you have to go get your signatures. And the percentage thresholds in Washington state also are higher than the percentage thresholds in California to get to that next step of the recall election. And I don't think it's ever actually happened in Washington state to go through both of those steps.
Okay. So, and the recall on him is kind of similar to challenging his executive powers right now, because you have to bring forth the motion to the court and you have to show the evidence. Mm-hmm. And recently there was a motion that challenged his executive order and by a local business owner, and the court didn't even make it to the point of hearing evidence. So the person who, I guess, reads through everything and decides whether it makes it to the court denied it immediately. So that seems to be a problem, not even able to reach the court. How do we get there?
Well, from my perspective, it's every November that's when it actually has to happen. And the great problem is, Jay Inslee just got 60% of the vote, almost right around that number, in the last election cycle. We can talk about election issues, but that's the reality of it. And the Democrats increased their majorities in the Senate and maintain their House majority. So right now it's very difficult. And people always say Jay Inslee, and he is, I think, overstepping. But the problem is the Democrat-controlled legislature has given Jay Inslee the ability to overstep. And every time they've had a chance to rein in his emergency powers, they refuse to do so. And in Olympia, during the last legislative session, unfortunately, on a partisan party line vote, the legislature voted to extend and enhance his emergency powers, not restrict them. So when you talk about a recall, I think a judge would be pretty hard-pressed to allow it to go forward based upon the fact that the duly elected legislature, the Democrats, allowed him to do this. And that's really the rub. And that's why in order to push back, we have to do it every single way we possibly can, build coalitions, to bring people's voices to be heard.
Right. So what's the likelihood of getting a special session? Because that's what people ask.
Yeah, also very thin. The Democrats enjoy this power. I mean, we just have to be honest about what's going on in Washington state. You have one-party control of the legislature. They utilized, the fear of COVID in the last legislative session to lock out the public. I mean, I told this story, but maybe some people still haven't heard it, right? Yeah. When I go down to Olympia on opening day last January, there were 900 National Guard troops surrounding the Capitol building. There was an 8-high-foot chain link fence locking every single person out, armed guards patrolling, not letting people. Well, of course, the taxpayers pay for that, of course. But, I could not get into my office. I was physically removed from my office. the day before opening day of session, from my office in the Capitol Dome. And the Democrats used their power to lock the public out and lock in the most radical agenda we've ever seen in the history of Washington State. By the way, none of which had to do with COVID relief. These are things like high-cost fuel standards, cap and tax, critical race theory, defunding police. All of these things were pushed through. Lest I forget, an income tax. Another big one. There was so much. It's hard to remember it all in terms of what they jammed through. None of it had to do with COVID. None of it had to do with actually making the public safer from the virus. It all had to do with expanding government and higher taxes. But they used COVID to lock the public out and jam their session through, which tells me they have no interest in having a special session. Right now, they're making plans to lock the public out again next January out of Olympia.